Boys. Good boys.
The mountains were quiet in the early morning. It was a silence that you only find in the high altitudes, a stillness that makes you feel as though the world hasn't quite woken up yet. The air was cool and crisp, with a faint hint of damp earth and pine. I, Sam, was once again leading a group of Americans. This was my job, my calling, my life. In my 22 years as a guide, I had walked these trails 1,000 times. I knew every rock, every crack in the cliff face, every turn of the river. My jacket was worn, my boots were sun-faded, and my face was wind-chapped. But in my soul, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. This time, the group consisted of 9 people. There were some young men and women, an elderly couple, and 3 others who seemed to be from the same company. Anna, a young woman in her 30s with smart, inquisitive eyes, caught my attention immediately. She didn't just look, she saw. She didn't just listen, she heard. The others were more or less the typical tourists I had seen hundreds of times. They were interested, but their attention quickly faded. Look at that cliff. I pointed to a massive stone pillar towering over the abyss. The locals say that this cliff is a place where the spirit of the mountains, the snow leopard, leaves its messages. It shows its strength, its will. And while many consider this just a myth, I know it's true. We don't see it, but we feel it. It's watching us. I told them about the snow leopard, about its majesty, its elusiveness. Usually, these stories captivated people. But this morning, as I spoke, my own narrative felt somehow dim. I had a gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. It was a faint, almost imperceptible sense of unease, a tension in the air that my years in the mountains had taught me to recognize. It felt like the calm before a storm, a stillness that wasn't natural. We walked for about 2 more hours. The sun's rays were already warming us, and we had taken off our jackets. The silence was broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the birds, who were accustomed to our presence. Suddenly, amidst the familiar sounds, I heard a cry. It wasn't the cry of a bird, nor the howl of the wind. It was a thin, desperate, pain-filled sound. I stopped instantly. My heart beat faster. What was that? I asked, more to myself than to the group. No one answered. Everyone walked on, absorbed in their conversations. Only Anna, who was closest to me, looked at me with concern. Sam, it sounded like something fell over there. She pointed to the side. Don't worry, I said to the group, which had already begun to move apart. Keep going, I'll catch up. It's probably just some animal. I stepped off the trail. Every step was cautious and deliberate. I knew that there were no trifles in the mountains, and any sound could mean danger. The cry repeated, and this time it was closer, and I realized it was not just an animal's cry, but a cry full of suffering and panic. I quickened my pace, navigating the treacherous terrain. My mind was racing, trying to identify the source, to categorize the sound. It was an unmistakable sound of distress, a young voice in absolute terror. I descended, carefully avoiding dangerous sections. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear, it was pure anxiety. The tension grew with every step. I was moving on instinct, ignoring the burning sensation in my calves and the scrape of rocks against my boots. My senses were heightened, my focus was absolute. Finally, I saw it. The jammed rocks and bushes opened a view to a small stone ledge. It was a perilous perch, no more than a meter wide, jutting out from a sheer cliff face. And there, huddling together, were 3 of them. 3 snow leopard cubs. Small, fluffy, with huge blue eyes filled with fear. They were trembling, their tiny bodies shaking uncontrollably. Their cries were so mournful, so full of despair, that I felt something inside me twist in a way I couldn't ignore. It was an involuntary, visceral reaction, a deep-seated need to help. I understood. They must have been chasing some prey or just playing, and they fell from somewhere high up, ending up on this tiny ledge. The rock was too slippery and sharp for them to climb back. I scanned the area above and below. Their mother was likely nearby, perhaps injured or frantically searching for a safe way to them. But time was a luxury we didn't have. They were so small, so exposed. The wind was picking up, swirling around the cliff face, and I knew that another gust could easily sweep them into the unforgiving chasm below. A sense of urgency, cold and sharp, washed over me. I had to act, and I had to act now. I climbed back up to the trail, my mind already working on a plan. The group was standing where I had left them, their faces a mix of impatience and curiosity. "I found what it was," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They are snow leopard cubs. 3 little ones. They're stuck on a rock ledge, and they need help." The group fell silent, the playful atmosphere of the morning completely gone. Frank, a stout man with a stern face, was the first to speak. "Sam, this is crazy," he said, his voice laced with skepticism. "We're on a schedule. This isn't your problem. They're wild animals. Their mother could be nearby and attack. This is a mountain, not a zoo." I looked at him, trying to convey the gravity of the situation without yelling. "Frank, they're just babies. They're terrified and freezing. And I guarantee they're not a threat. We are their only chance. Leaving them is not an option." Anna stepped forward, her eyes filled with determination. "Sam, I'm a vet," she repeated, her voice firm and clear. "I can help. What do we need? Ropes, first aid, anything. I have a medical kit with me, and I can assess their condition once they're up. Let's do this." Her support was a lifeline. 2 other men, John and Mike, also came forward, volunteering to help. The rest of the group, looking a little confused and unsettled, decided to continue to the nearby camp. I gave them instructions to alert the park rangers as soon as they had a signal, but I knew that even in the best-case scenario, it would be at least 12 hours before anyone could get to us. We were on our own. We quickly set up an anchor point. I used my climbing gear and secured the rope to a large, unmovable juniper tree, its roots dug deep into the rocky soil. The process was painstaking and required absolute focus. I triple-checked every knot and carabiner. Anna, John, and Mike stood ready, watching me with a mixture of fear and resolve. I strapped the rope to my harness and took a deep breath. "All right, I'm going down," I said, my voice low. "Keep the tension on the rope. If I yell, pull me up immediately. Don't take any chances." The descent was brutal. The cliff face was much steeper and more treacherous than it had looked from above. Sharp stones cut into my hands, and I had to test every foothold before trusting it. The wind was my enemy, trying to push me away from the rock, making my footing even more precarious. I was just 20 feet from the ledge when it happened. The rock I was leaning on with my right foot gave way with a sickening crack. I lost my balance, and my body swung out into the empty air. The rope jerked violently, and for a split second, I was completely weightless, staring into the abyss below. I heard Anna scream my name, a sound of sheer terror. The rope went taut. John and Mike strained, their hands white-knuckled on the rope, their faces contorted with effort. I dangled for what felt like an eternity, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But then, they managed to pull me back, and I found a new, more stable foothold. I closed my eyes for a moment. The image of the fall seared into my mind. I was trembling, but I didn't give up. I had to keep going. Finally, I reached the ledge. I carefully crawled toward the cubs. They hissed at me, their tiny bodies trembling. They were no bigger than house cats, with massive paws and those piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold a universe of fear. I spoke to them softly, my voice a low, soothing hum. I moved slowly, making sure not to scare them. I carefully took out a wool blanket from my backpack and wrapped the first one, a tiny male who was shivering the most. He squirmed for a moment, then nestled into the warmth, his small body relaxing. I repeated the process with the 2 others, both females. I secured them inside my backpack, creating small pockets for them to sit in comfortably and safely. It was the only way to get them up without causing them more trauma. The ascent was even more difficult than the descent. The added weight of the cubs and the adrenaline wearing off made every pull on the rope an immense effort. I could hear their soft purrs and mews from the backpack, and that sound was all the motivation I needed. Their little noses would occasionally bump against my back, a silent sign of trust. It was a strange, powerful connection with these wild, scared creatures. I pushed on, my muscles burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I finally reached the top, Anna rushed over, her face a mix of relief and concern. She checked me for injuries, her hands gentle as she cleaned the deep cuts on my palms. "Sam, you're absolutely insane," she said, but her eyes were full of tears. "But you're also the bravest person I've ever met." I just nodded, exhausted but relieved. We carefully took the cubs out of the backpack. Anna's hands, now professional and calm, checked each one of them for injuries. Their fur was matted and dirty, but they were breathing, and their eyes were bright. She gave them water from a syringe, and they drank it eagerly. They're dehydrated and cold, but I think they'll be okay, she said, her voice full of emotion. No broken bones, thank goodness. They were just lucky. We wrapped them in warm blankets and put them in a protected spot, a small hollow in the rocks. We decided to name them while we waited. Anna named the boy Leo, and the two girls Mila and Kira. We talked for a while, the adrenaline slowly leaving our bodies. The rest of the group arrived a few hours later, and their initial skepticism had been replaced by a quiet awe. Frank walked up to me, his face humbled. "Sam, I was wrong," he said, his voice low. "I truly admire what you did. I'm glad you saved them." I just nodded, a silent acknowledgement. We all knew this was more than just a rescue. It was a moment that changed something in all of us. The group, with Anna and the others, decided to continue to the main camp to get help. I knew they needed to leave, but I also knew I couldn't go. I had to stay with the cubs and wait for their mother. I couldn't just abandon them now. "I'll stay with them," I told Anna. "I'll keep them safe. You get to the camp and call the rangers. Tell them to send a vet and some supplies. But don't tell them where the cubs are. Let's see if the mother comes back first." Anna hesitated, but then she understood. She hugged me, a tight, genuine hug. "Be safe, Sam," she said, before turning and following the others. And then I was alone again, in the vast silence of the mountains. Just me, 3 small, fragile lives, and the setting sun. I sat on a rock, watching them sleep, and I felt a profound sense of responsibility. I knew I was putting my own safety at risk, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Hours passed. The sun disappeared, and the temperature dropped. I started a small, controlled fire for warmth and kept my ears peeled for any sound. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. They were not the footsteps of a wild animal. They were human. My heart tightened. I saw an old man, his hair and beard as gray as the rocks he walked on. He was wearing a worn-out coat, and in his hands, he held an old rifle. It was Jack, a legendary hunter from these parts. He had hunted here his whole life, and his one, all-consuming obsession was to get a snow leopard. "I'm looking for tracks," he said, his voice raspy and low. "I saw a mother running this way earlier. Something must have happened." Then he saw me, and then he saw the cubs, nestled in my sleeping bag near the fire. A predatory spark lit up in his eyes. He wasn't looking at them as helpless creatures. He was looking at them as a means to an end, a way to find their mother, the trophy he had spent his life chasing. "What are you doing with them?" he asked, his grip on the rifle tightening. "I rescued them," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "They fell from the cliff. I'm waiting for their mother." Jack's smile was thin and devoid of warmth. "I'm waiting for her too, but for a different purpose." The air grew heavy with tension. I knew this was a confrontation, not a conversation. I had to fight, not with my fists, but with words, with empathy. "Jack, you can't do this," I said, my voice low and earnest. "She's probably injured, and these little ones will die without her. Look at them. They're just babies." He scoffed. "That's nature, son. The weak perish. The strong survive. This isn't weakness. It's a tragedy." I countered, my voice gaining a desperate edge. "She's a mother. She's fighting for her children. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the cubs. I didn't know if my words were getting through to him, or if he was just calculating his next move. And then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, I heard a different sound. A soft rustling, the scuff of paws on stone. We both froze. Jack raised his rifle, his knuckles white. I slowly, carefully, got to my feet, shielding the cubs with my body. She emerged from behind a large rock. Majestic, wounded, and exhausted. It was the mother snow leopard. Her beautiful fur was matted with dirt and blood, and there was a deep gash on her hind leg. She watched us, her eyes a mix of fury, fear, and a desperate hope. She saw me, then she saw her cubs, and a low, guttural growl rumbled in her chest. Jack's grip on the rifle loosened. His eyes, which had held nothing but a hunter's cold focus moments before, now held a hint of something else. He saw the same thing I did, a creature in pain, a mother fighting for her family. He was looking at something more than a trophy. He was looking at a living, breathing testament to survival. He slowly, deliberately, lowered his rifle. We walked for several hours in silence, the weight of the previous events heavy in the air between us. The sun had completely disappeared, and the first stars were beginning to appear, tiny pinpricks of light in a vast, dark sky. The cool mountain air felt different now, no longer just a physical sensation, but a part of the profound stillness that surrounded us. It was Jack who finally broke the quiet. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, devoid of its former harshness. "I've been hunting since I was a boy," he began, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "My father was a hunter, and his father before him. It was a way of life, a test of skill. And for 40 years, that snow leopard, it was my white whale. I tracked it for months, years. It was a phantom, a ghost. I convinced myself that catching it would be the crowning achievement of my life, the story I would tell on my deathbed." He stopped walking and looked at me, his eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. But tonight was different. Watching her, watching them, I saw something more than a prize. I saw a mother's love. I saw a family's fight to survive. The chase, the kill, it all seems so empty now. I thought I was a master of the mountains, but I was just a visitor. You're a part of it. His words hung in the air, a confession born of a lifetime of chasing a ghost. I didn't say anything, just listened. There was no need for me to offer an opinion. His own heart had already told him the truth. We continued our journey, and the rest of the walk was filled with a new kind of silence, a silence of understanding and shared respect. He wasn't just a hunter anymore. He was a man grappling with a fundamental shift in his identity. I saw his calloused hands, hands that had held a rifle for decades, now resting empty by his side. We parted ways the next morning near the first mountain pass. He gave me a firm nod, a look of quiet gratitude in his eyes. He didn't promise to stop hunting, but I knew, with an absolute certainty, that he would never hunt a snow leopard again. Maybe he would never hunt anything again. The mountains had taught him a lesson far more valuable than any trophy. 2 days later, I met up with Anna and the others. They had contacted the rangers, who were now on their way with supplies. They were relieved to see me, and they were thrilled to hear that the cubs and their mother were safe. Anna hugged me again, a long, emotional embrace. "Sam, what you did was incredible," she said, her voice full of awe. "You didn't just save 3 lives. You helped a whole family. You didn't give up on them, even when others told you to. You risked your life for them. That kind of compassion, it's what gives me hope." She sat me down and told me how she had talked to the rangers. She had explained the entire situation, emphasizing the importance of leaving the family undisturbed. She had even told them about Jack and the change she saw in him through my words. Her face was bright with purpose. "I'm a vet, but I'm also a conservationist. And this story, Sam, it's a powerful story. It's a reminder of why we do what we do. It's about more than just animals. It's about our humanity." I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt like a person who had done what needed to be done. But in the weeks and months that followed, I realized that Anna was right. The story had a life of its own. I started receiving messages from her and the rangers. They had set up a monitoring system in the area to keep an eye on the leopard family, and they asked me to be a part of their team, to use my expertise as a guide to help them. I readily agreed. This experience changed my life in a fundamental way. I stopped leading traditional tours. Instead, my tours became educational journeys, focusing on the importance of preservation, of respecting the wild. I would lead groups to the very spot where I found the cubs, and I would tell them the story, not as a heroic tale about myself, but as a lesson in compassion and the interconnectedness of all life. I showed them the majesty of the mountains, not as a backdrop for a photo, but as a fragile ecosystem that needs our protection. I kept in touch with Jack. He had indeed given up hunting. He now spent his days carving small wooden animals, deer, bears, and, occasionally, a snow leopard, which he sold in a small shop in a nearby village. His snow leopards were the most beautiful of all. He would tell me that the leopard he had chased all his life had finally given him something, not a trophy, but a new purpose. A year later, I was leading a new group. We were on the same trail, and I was telling them the story. The landscape was a little different. The juniper tree had grown a bit, and a new patch of wildflowers had bloomed on the cliff face. It was a beautiful, clear day. As we approached the familiar cliff, I stopped, and there she was, the mother snow leopard, sitting on the same rock, looking stronger and more beautiful than ever. Her fur was sleek and healthy, and her eyes held a quiet wisdom. And beside her were the three cubs, no longer tiny bundles, but strong, vibrant young leopards, playing and pouncing on the rocks with an effortless grace. They were healthy, alive, and thriving. I felt a profound sense of peace and overwhelming gratitude. My heart was full. I pointed them out to the group, my voice thick with emotion. "Look," I whispered, barely able to speak. "That's the spirit of the mountains. And those are her children. They survived. They are living." The group stood in silent awe, watching the incredible scene unfold. It was the most beautiful moment of my life, a moment that had been born out of terror and despair, but had blossomed into hope and grace. I knew then that my life had a new, profound purpose. Every living creature has a right to life, and we, as humans, have the right and the duty to protect it. That day, I learned that the greatest trophies are not what you take from the mountains, but what you help save and what you inspire others to protect. The story of those three cubs was no longer just my story. It was a story for all of us.